Hi there everyone. Someone reached out to me on the Substack recently and asked a question that I have had before, and I thought it's a really good topic for a video, and that's, what do you do when you have to live in close quarters with people who you disagree with quite strongly politically, especially when that person is hyper aggressive and has the different views to you? It might be a family member, a roommate, a work colleague, and so on. It's a big question and one that we all have to address, but there's so much to learn here. Like I was talking about in a recent video, Thich Nhat Hanh once said, everything in life can be a spiritual lesson, and this can be a huge one. Now, first things first, if we're getting lost in arguing, well, let's be honest, that's a lower human dimension. Not to say I don't get lost in it, or, we never do, but it's a lower human dimension. We haven't learned the key lesson of human beings and life yet. Number one, Dale Carnegie famously said that if you struggle under the illusion that people are creatures of logic, not emotion, it will drive you mad. You have to understand the vast majority of people are emotionally driven. Therefore, arguments aren't really logical as much as we'd like to think they are. They're logical on the surface, but what's going on beneath is something much more profound. And until we understand that, it's going to drive us absolutely bonkers. Admittedly, there are some rare souls who will look at things purely logically, but they won't really get in an argument with you. They'll have more of a quiet debate or try and take on your view and think about it over a number of weeks and so on. And the third point here that we have to learn is politics is people's identity. And this is really important because we tend to think in the modern age, if I'm right, I'll just say I'm right and the other person will be wrong, and then I win. That's not how it works. Sometimes you're not right, you just think you are. And other times, even if you are right, the other person isn't going to say straight away, oh, yep, you're completely right, I'm wrong. Because they see it as a form of their very ego. And to be wrong when you see something as a form of your ego is an effective death to the ego. It's total humiliation, and the ego won't accept it. I think it was Sam Harris who said he prefers Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to debates because in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, someone will have to tap out. In a debate, they never will. They'll always try and find an out. And we have to understand here the friend-enemy distinction. Carl Schmitt, the German political analyst, wrote a bit about this, saying that's the basis of politics. Is, these are my friends versus my enemy. Now, it's a bit richer than that, but that's the basic ego level distinction, which is true on the ego level. And it's important that we understand that because, again, people who are most eager to argue will be convinced that they're morally right. And they want to express that to the world because they want the celebration of the world. Very, very rarely do they want to actually learn something, which essentially renders any conversation completely pointless. And this is the hard bit because this is where we have to do that so wise Christian teaching that is so badly understood. And this would be to lay down your weapons. There's a great teaching from Christ, which is if someone wants to steal your cloak, give him your tunic also. Now you can imagine the warrior oriented among us, no way, that's insane. I'm going to fight and win. Yet that fighting and winning never really results in what we want it to. And this is something that we have to be aware of, the deeper spiritual dimension that's beyond this ego level of right and wrong. Alexander Solzhenitsyn famously said, good and bad doesn't run down political lines, it runs down the human heart. He's talking to a higher level truth there. And what Christ is talking to is if someone's all up in their emotions and getting angry, let them have it. It doesn't matter. It's not going to change the world. There's that great meme where it says, the world before your opinion and after, and the world's the same. This is where we have to come to peace with something's just not mattering and it's just not worth arguing. The world won't change. Now, there are nuances to that, which I'll get onto. There are maybe some cases where it's worth making a counter case. But when it's a family member, a colleague, it's just not worth it. All it's going to do is harm you and the other person. And most of the time, if I'm dealing with someone who's really obstreperous, who's really truculent, really strongly opinionated, I'm just going to try and listen to their opinion because there's nothing going on here where there's any learning, there's going to be any ground made. And that's all you can really do. And if you do argue, all you're going to find is a complete mess for both of you. And in fact, many people want that mess because, to be blunt, there's demons inside of both. And what you find is just two demons going at each other. because, there might be all sorts of anger or trauma or blocked up feelings in there that they need to get out. And sometimes that's why you find, especially on the online world, you get an aggressive leftist, aggressive rightist, and they'll just argue with each other. And you can see deep down they kind of love each other because they finally found that sparring partner they can just go rah all day at, It's not my cup of tea, if I'm honest. But here are some key lessons which I think are really vital that can help us in this regard. Because again, it's not about never having an opinion. You're more than welcome to have an opinion. It's about having an opinion at the right time that can actually create something fruitful in the world and that doesn't create all this hell and mess in your own life. So the first, as I say, is if you can't escape an argument with a colleague or a family member, they're just too toxic. And if you've tried to leave it and they keep going on and on and on, unfortunately, you're just going to have to limit your correspondence with that person. That's just the harsh truth, because there's nothing good that can come of this, whether you argue or you don't. They're just stuck in that demonic energy. Of course, we've got to see that in ourselves too. Do we want to force people to our point of view? Do we yabber on all the time? It's something to look at in ourselves, because again, we're not truly living then. We're lost in a form of unconsciousness, and we're not going to help the cause we believe in anyway. We're just going to become a toxic element of it. Number 2, debates are only really worth it if you have either an objective audience or you're talking to an objective person. Then maybe you can have an open debate. And again, they are skilled people. They're people that are really valuable because they will take on other ideas. In an ideal world, that's what a father should offer to a son. When the son goes off and, gets into Marxist philosophy and starts listening to Talib Kweli and Mos Def and Tupac Shakur, you don't say to them, don't do that, it's all wrong, listen to Jimi Hendrix and Bob Dylan. You let them go into it and express it and find out what's in there that's supposedly, so challenging to your worldview and find a logical way through. Because while they might not see it in time, what they are learning is that you yourself are confident and comfortable enough in your views to have a counter case, as well as to let them explore theirs. Very often, he who shouts the loudest doesn't really know how to debate. There's lots of people out there who are excellent at arguing but terrible at debating. That's why I say sometimes you need an objective audience or an objective middleman. Because if you don't have that, it's just going to be who's best at arguing. You see that all the time these days. Someone shouts over the other. They're good at Mickey taking. They can misconstrue what the other person's saying, kick the ball into the long grass. How many times do you see that in debates? And then they'll go away with, I destroyed X in capital letters. And the other person will say the same. But it's all just engagement farming. There's nothing in there to be learned or gained. The true soul isn't really gaining. When I say soul, I mean the collective soul. The culture's not advancing at all. In fact, if anything, it's being wounded. I think, is it George Bernard Shaw who said, never wrestle with a pig. The pig just gets dirty. You just get dirty and the pig enjoys it. It's something like that. You won't feel good after. Third, key lesson here. People don't change their minds quickly, and very rarely do they change it on the basis of one argument or even 10 arguments. Think about when you changed your mind in your life. I know I changed my mind from kind of the cliche leftist liberalism I grew up with to more conservative Christian positions. But 10 years before I did that, I would have thought my opinions were all, hatred and all this sort of stuff. I would have thought that how could someone think these things? Aren't they mean? Aren't we supposed to all believe in, equality and inclusion and these sorts of things? And then I sort of realised over time, much later down the line, that's actually very harmful to individuals and society. And again, there were elements of that which came from doing a MA, where I realised a lot of this left-wing stuff is a bit bonkers, actually. And I don't think these people really have good motives at their heart. Not the average person on the street. I think many people do. It's just their compassion is being used. But some of the people, the academics and stuff, I could see they were resentful and they wanted to rip apart the Western tradition, and that's not good. In fact, that's going to be very, very damaging, and is very damaging, as we're witnessing. But what changed my mind wasn't just intellectual argument. It was the heart, really. It was growing up and being effectively told that Britain is bad, that males are bad, whiteness is bad. And then realising, actually, I am from England, and, Shakespeare, he's pretty good. And loads of the romantic poets I was reading at the time, I'm like, well, these don't seem like monsters. The music is very good, from England as well. Architecture is particularly beautiful, the countryside and the literature therein. And of course, bit by bit, you think this is really moving. There's something real here that you can really tap into. It's very profound. And so it's almost as if your spirit gets taken over by something deeply profound and beautiful, and then the mind follows. And that's been my experience with changing my mind. And you'll find that with people. It's not this immediate thing. It's a process. It takes time. And that's why you can't yell it into somebody. You have to leave them be. And worse still, this is key lesson number 4. Sometimes when you're arguing against somebody, you're doing them a disservice because you're providing an enemy for them that they so deeply crave to go against. You see this again all the time in the modern culture. The constant representation of the fatherly white male as, an oppressor, as evil. And it's because many of these kids coming out of the university system need that to justify their own worldview. So will do anything to try and manipulate an image of men into that. And of course, if you argue back, what you tend to find is they finally got someone to argue with. But what you might be doing by doing that is blocking them from hitting the wall. And that's really where they learn from life. They learn from God himself. And says, actually, you got this wrong. That's what happened to me, actually. I had to realize my life isn't working out. There's something wrong in my soul. I need to organize this correctly. And I had to get broken down in order to break or build myself back up on stronger foundations. Again, that's the core of the 7 steps I'm promoting on the Substack. I'll speak about that more in a month or so when I bring another group through. But the point here is it's allowing people to actually fall into hell themselves. And then, of course, the final key lesson, and this is a difficult one as well, we tend to think, and again, this is ideology, that our side is always right all the time. That's not true. I wouldn't even say that's particularly consistent with the conservative worldview either, which would accept that the world is imperfect and ideology is imperfect. But again, it's the modern internet. We tend to think our worldview is right. The opposition is wrong. And again, it's fine to think that one side might be broadly right. But this idea of us being exclusively right all the time is an illusion. Now, I personally would agree or argue that the modern left has become a bit toxic. I think it's lost some of its qualities. But in a civilizational context, I can see the role of the left. I can see in some sense it has Christ-like qualities. Like, for instance, calling out the corrupted behaviour of the rich and powerful. That should be a classic left-wing thing to do. Now, again, very often they get that wrong. They point it in the wrong places. When they're in power, they don't know what to do because all they know how to do is complain about the power structure. Now they are the power structure. Also, as we're fully aware at this point, after the 20th century, when left-wing parties get into power, they tend to veer heavily towards authoritarianism. That can be the devouring mother energy, telling you what to do, think and feel. But at the same time, there is still something in the left where it can have a good side. It may be something in there too about trade unions, trying to ensure that people are treated fairly. Those at the bottom, you still consider those people. Again, that can turn toxic and arguably has with the toxic empathy stuff and probably the over-celebration of the victim. Which is very often just really what's behind it is a hatred. I think Jordan Peterson's banged on about this a lot, but a hatred, if you like, of competence that you get on the right. Now, that's all true, but it doesn't mean there is no positive side to the left. Same with the right. Now, I would broadly say I associate more right than left, although I do have some left-wing instincts. But I think you can also get a big problem with the right. I've spoken a lot about this on the main channel. The over-obsession with money, with self-centeredness, with success, over things like community, over things like the collective, the nation, God. That could be a lower form, a lower expression of the more masculine political pole, whereas really what it should be is in the Divine Father. And the point I'm getting to here is while I do believe the father should lead, I believe the structure of the family should be the structure of the politics that creates a safe and stable environment for the whole, both again in the family and in the society. We have to understand that tradition is bigger than left and right. It's far bigger. Both can fit into that and play a role. It's the same thing. The spirit is bigger than the mind. So what we're talking to here is when we are dealing with these people, it's not about being condescending and, I'm in the spirit, you're in the mind. We're still in the mind if we're doing that. We still want to win. It's understanding that we're just going to get pulled into the world and it's an illusion that something good can come from it. And if somebody, your family member or a colleague, can't get out of that space, that's not your fault. You just have to be at peace with it like Jesus, let them take your tunic too and leave it. Because there's nothing to be gained, only trouble. Save your energy for where it can actually have a purpose. Listen to their arguments quietly. This reminds me, when I used to work in the offices in London, it was around the time of all the BLM stuff. Now, of course, at this point, I was thinking very deeply about the world. And I was like, yeah, this BLM stuff, it's not what it's cracked up to be. You know, it's just neo-Marxism, really. They are not supporting fathers, the family, Christian tradition. And a lot of Christians around me at that point were sort of into it. And a lot of, as you can imagine, people in my workplace, the young people, were hook, line and sinker into it. And I realised, look, if I start talking up and say, well, actually, that's wrong, this is wrong, and blah, 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 it's just going to create trouble. So it was a wonderful practice for me to think, look, no difference is going to be made here by my arguments. But can I allow this debate to go on next to me and be still and not jump? Now, I am not Jesus Christ. I'm not the Buddha. So my ego was flaring. I want to answer. I want to fight back. I want to tell them they're wrong. But it was a real practice to say, just be still. Let it go by. Be still as you are. And it really benefited me down the line as I started to have more impactful and important debates when they did matter, because I could stop and listen and realize there was something bigger. And again, this is the fundamental of all the great spiritual teachings. You know, we can't get too wrapped up in the events of the world. That doesn't mean you don't have an opinion. That doesn't mean you can't have a strong opinion. It doesn't mean you can't have debates. But it means that we do adhere to something higher and we don't get lost in the noise and anarchy of the world, which will just drag you down and destroy you. The real pit of that is hell, really. And we do know those people who live in hell because they're on Twitter every day. Yeah, off they go. You know, yelling at someone they hate. You know, I was watching this guy on Twitter the other day. I don't use Twitter because I find it a bit too toxic, but you know, someone I started following, and I just thought I'd monitored his tweets, and I noticed he was tweeting all day. I mean, at night. It was like he slept for about 4 hours, and then he's up, tweeting up, and you're thinking, this guy must have woken up at like 2:30 to send an angry tweet. You're thinking, look, you might be the smartest guy on earth, but your soul is being contorted. And that isn't helpful to you. It's not helpful to your family. It's not helpful to your future community. It's not helpful to your relationship with God. And it is not helpful for the future rebirth of the tradition. So I hope this makes sense what I'm saying. But remember, all of these things are massive opportunities for spiritual growth and freedom. Not about being, quote, better than other people. It's about coming back to what you are, abiding with being and peace, and letting that overflow in your life so you can be a more effective human being and be like a lion. That's what it's really about. Hope this makes sense to some of you out there. I'm holding a free call on Saturday for the paid subs on the Substack, so do come along to that if you're interested. If you're new to this channel, please do let me know your thoughts below and subscribe. I will do another video again soon. Have a great rest of the day, everyone. God bless.